Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Supported Living virtual stakeholder meeting webinar today. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Kelly Friedlander, and I will be the facilitator for the webinar today. Today, we will hear from Jesse Smathers, Special Populations Clinical Director at VIA Health, Kenneth Bossell, IDD Manager at NC Medicaid Behavioral Health. This webinar is being sponsored by the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities and the North Carolina Money Follows the Person Project. Thank you both so much for your generous support. This virtual stakeholder meeting is an opportunity, has two main goals. The first is to provide an update on the status of the Supported Living Initiative and policies related to supported living from the state. And the second goal is to be a forum where interested parties from across the state can share their experiences, ask questions, and brainstorm solutions to issues. Some quick housekeeping before we begin. Everyone is currently on mute, but there's a chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. Please enter questions you'd like the presenters to answer throughout the webinar. They'll answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. Handouts of this presentation and a recording of the webinar will be available on the DD Council's website, nccdd.org, next week. In addition, a short survey will be sent out after the webinar. Please take a few minutes to complete the survey and provide feedback. This will help us make sure that the information that we're providing to you is useful in the future. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jesse.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just as soon as it got passed over to me, I got kicked off the webinar, but fortunately I've already called in and I have the slide presentation in front of me, so I'll do the best I can. The Supported Living Initiative is, the Supported Living Making the Difference Initiative is a 3-year initiative that started with the NC Council in January of 2017. VIA Health was selected to operate this initiative. The initiative is funded by the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities and the Money Follows the Person Demonstration Project. VIA Health is the lead agency. The initiative is $100,000 each year that it's authorized. We have been funded for 2 years now, and in August we were funded for our third and final year. In the initiative, we are partnering with 4 provider agencies in North Carolina, 1 statewide agency, the ARC of North Carolina, another almost statewide agency in Turning Point Services, Liberty Corner Enterprises, which is primarily in the western region of the state, and First Resource Center, which is also primarily in the western region of the state, to work with people that are transitioning into supported living, to follow them and track how they do, identify issues and barriers, and try to offer solutions to those issues. We are receiving guidance in this initiative from the National Leadership Consortium at the University of Delaware. The National Leadership Consortium has done different projects in North Carolina, and with this project, they are providing the expertise of Nancy Weiss and Caitlin Bailey. We're also working closely with Lynn Siegel of Hope House Foundation. She is the executive director of that agency, and as many of you know, that agency supports 110 people in their own homes. They have not had a group home or congregate living arrangement that was not an apartment setting since 1994. We're also partnering with Derek Dufresne. He is with Community Resource Alliance. He's providing guidance at different points and doing a number of the technical aspects with the providers that we're working with. Next slide, please. Thus far with the initiative, Liberty Corner Enterprises has moved 9 people, and they have 2 people planning to move. Turning Point Services has moved 5. They are working for 1 other person to move. And First Resource Center has moved 5 people, with 1 in the planning stages. and the ARC has moved 6 individuals and has 1 person in the planning stages. The Liberty Corner Enterprises, as of July 31st, actually transitioned 6 people away from a group home, and many of them went into supported living. They made the decision to divest themselves of property, and this was the first group home that they have closed. They plan to mirror what's happening with Hope House Foundation in Norfolk, Virginia. That's their long-term goal and their strategic plans. Lynn Siegel has been working closely with Liberty Corners to help them transition in that manner. She actually completed a consulting visit where they were focused on team building and participatory management at the end of last week. And they're really excited about the progress they're making. First was building supported living from the ground up. They were not offering any type of residential services, and they have transitioned the 5 folks into supported living. 2 people were in a traditional group home that is now a supported living setting, and they've moved 2 individuals directly from developmental centers into supported living settings. First has also worked with 1 person that moved out of his family's home and is receiving supported living. The Turning Point Services, they have moved 5 people, and all of these transitions have been mostly individuals moving out of group settings. In a few situations, it was individuals that were living in their own home, but the services they were receiving were stacked community living supports and community networking. And since they've transitioned to supported living, a couple of the individuals are using a lot less service and are enjoying, they're still getting the same supports they needed, but they are not billing 12 hours a day because the daily service has more flexibility. The ARC has moved a couple people in the eastern part of the state. I actually have not received an update from the ARC this month, and some of that difficulty has been that my contacts are based in Wilmington. And as y'all can imagine, they've had a challenge with regard to the hurricane, which is why we delayed this presentation. With regard to other pieces of the initiative, we have this year held a couple of stakeholder meetings that were face-to-face in Raleigh. One was April 6th and one was April 17th. The stakeholder meeting revealed some top priorities, and there were a number of issues and challenges identified, challenges with staff, housing, some challenges with the service definition that I know we'll address a little bit later, the need for a resource manual, cross-system navigation challenges, questions about whether or not the funding's enough, how to align services with support plans, family education and support challenges, the need to strengthen clinical infrastructure and different ways to use technology. With regard to the resource manual, we have been in partnership with a work group that is hosted by Trish Farnham, and it includes all the MCOs, and there's provider feedback and some family feedback incorporated into the mechanisms that we're using. And we're very close to having a resource manual put together. It was a deliverable for the last year, or for the second year of the initiative. And our plan is to create an electronic document that will be housed on the North Carolina Council of Developmental Disabilities webpage. And we're going to partner with the MCOs and other places to link to the council webpage with regard to information regarding supported living. Our vision is that there'll be a number of pages that can be linked to and printed out really as almost trifold brochures or little pamphlets, so that the material can be printed and shared with folks that aren't able to access it or choose not to access the information through the World Wide Web. We identified in the stakeholder meetings the need for increasing clinical infrastructure and improving training for direct support professionals as a top priority. One of the things that came of that event was a workshop that was hosted in partnership with Monarch, Alliance Behavioral Health, Cardinal Innovations, via Alliance, if I haven't already said them, Money Follows the Person, and the Council, to bring David Petoniak, who is a internationally known expert in addressing behaviors for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. He offered a web workshop on July 31st in Durham. That workshop was attended by 199 people, including all walks of all types of stakeholders. There were direct support professionals there, family members, and other professionals. That workshop was very well received, and our intention is to do a closeout of the initiative that includes more workshops and information from David Petoniak. And we have also done a number of presentations this year at different conferences, including the ARC conference, NC TIDE, the National Conference for Councils on Developmental Disabilities, and we're getting the word out. Currently, on this listserv that notifies you of these webinars and such, there are 922 people, and all those individuals are interested in finding a way to make supported living work, or having supported living work for someone they love, or supported living working for them. We have another webinar scheduled it's next week, October 10th, and that will be the National Association Direct Support Professionals. John Raphael will be doing a presentation about supporting informed decision making and how staff and people working with people with disabilities can really focus on supporting them to make their own decisions. And in our resource booklet that we're working with, we're rephrasing the term dignity of risk to be dignity of experience, because it sounds a little softer, and it really is more what you're trying to accomplish with regard to giving people choices and the opportunity to make decisions. We have webinars scheduled with the ARC and Turning Point that will be similar to webinars that have already been presented by Liberty Corner Enterprises and FIRST, webinars that focus on that agency's experience, how they've worked with an individual or two to ensure that their services and supports are provided through supported living, what they've learned, pitfalls, ways that others can avoid those, or changes that they think need to be made so that others can move forward. And there's also a webinar scheduled. This is a makeup webinar again. This will be featuring Karen Lucan, and it's about separating health from health care, because they're not specifically the same thing, and often in large systems we get lost and treat both as the same. We will be scheduling in November a stakeholders meeting face-to-face somewhere in the Triangle area, and we'll be sending out invitations, and we'd really like to see family participation in that. At that stakeholders meeting, we will be reviewing what's happened, where the agencies we work with are with regard to support with individuals, and plans for the final year of the initiative, and continuing a sustainable learning community. It is our intention, as we come to the wrap-up conference, to have some individual stories on videotape of individuals that have been using supported living and have had and sometimes positive, and in some cases not so positive experiences. So that's really a summary of where we are with the initiative to this point. And with that, I will yield to Kenneth, who's going to provide some updates around the innovations waiver. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll get started. This is Kenneth Bussell from North Carolina Medicaid. So just kind of recap of why I feel like we're here as well. As Jesse talked about a little bit earlier, we had a bunch of physical stakeholder meetings around supported living in general. We had some in November, March, and April. And at all of these meetings, the participants who were able to attend talked a lot about wanting to have an open forum to learn from each other, so other people using supported living, troubleshooting issues, and providing continuous feedback to assist with guiding supported living. So that's kind of why we're here now. This is kind of this first stab of having this open type of call to get everybody's feedback. So hopefully the information that we're sharing with you can spark some good conversations. If not, we'll have to think about how to move forward. So one other thing I just wanted to talk about a little bit is that we are going to be making some supported living policy changes that we hope to make with the innovations renewal. As you know, the innovations renewal has been delayed because of a number of reasons, and the fact that we haven't been able to get it up for public comment yet. We're still working with some of our other partners within the state, and we should hope to get that up soon. So these are some of those changes that we hope to make. These changes that we hope to make, we've developed with our innovation stakeholder work group, where we had individuals who were accessing supported living or had family members and providers who were utilizing supported living. So this is where this information is coming from. So the first one is that we are planning to make this service be allowed to be self-directed. So someone could use agency of choice or employer of record to self-direct supported living. When we developed this definition in the beginning, that's something that we did not check the box to allow to be self-directed, and we noticed that that was probably a mistake in the beginning. Originally, our reasoning was that because this is a new service and a lot of people would be living independently for the first time, allowing that self-directed option when we didn't know that much about the service yet could cause problematic, but we know now that a lot of people want the service to be self-directed, and we think to allow people to have more and more control over their life, having this be a self-directed option makes the most sense. The second kind of category is supported living and family. So right now we have some language in the waiver that a person cannot receive supported living in the same home unless they're using innovations supports. So we're changing that so that the family member could be receiving other disability-specific services, could be a spouse, a minor child, it could be also a grandparent, things like that, and other members of the extended family. So allowing for people who are using other disability-specific services to live in the same home as the person with supported living. We had a number of cases where someone maybe was using mental health types of services and the individual with supported living wanted to live with their family member, and that caused a little bit of problems. We also had some other issues where someone who had a grandparent or a parent who was becoming elderly and they were kind of switching their home in general, and they couldn't do that as well. So just allowing this to be a more naturalized type of environment. The next big kind of change is regarding the levels. And the levels, when we developed this service, were pretty prescriptive. So it had, hours. It also had some information about how individuals would have to have an awake overnight staff or would have to have a staff on site, those kind of things. We tried to make these a lot more broad so that someone who was at level 3 wouldn't necessarily have to have an overnight awake staff the whole night. They could use appropriate technology. If they were in level 3 because of whatever issue, but they didn't need to have an awake overnight staff the whole time, they could have some other way to really make sure that their needs are being met. The reason that we did this, and then level 2 as well, we made it a little bit more open, We used to have language that the caregiver must be on site. Now it could be on site, things like that. So just making it a little bit less explicit and a little bit less prescriptive. The reason that we're making that change is that we heard of a lot of people who were in certain levels, and because our definition was so prescriptive, they were almost being overserved. So it was making it difficult within the $135,000 budget, or they didn't have as much flexibility with their other services because they were being overserved during the evening time. And also it was allowing for certain individuals to not be able to be as independent. So someone could be at level 3 for whatever reason and could use technology to be more independent, but our definition as it stands now doesn't really allow that to happen. So we tried to make these definitions more open. The special needs adjustment, so that typically talked about how they could be done for 90 days, and it didn't really talk about what would happen after the 90 days. So we have changed this definition as well, or are asking to change this definition when we submit to CMS, that there's no limit of the number of times a person can go through a special needs adjustment. So just again, making it so someone's life doesn't have to change in quarter increments. Another thing that we heard a lot when we were having our stakeholder meetings, our listening sessions, and our innovations work group is who plans for supported living. We heard a lot about families who had to take a lot of time to really kind of map out what a person's life would look like, really find housing, really look at what the person's needs were, and it became very burdensome. So what we've also done is developed a supported living transition service, and that will be the purpose of that is to provide members with the support they need to facilitate their transition to supported living. And it covers things like meeting the person who is preparing to transition in an effort to get to know them and assess their support needs for supported living. So assessing what their levels of independence are. Can they cook meals? How do they handle their basic household maintenance tasks? Who do they know who to call for help? What other types of technologies would support their success? So either they may be using that technology already, and we want to make sure that when they go into this new setting, they have access to it, or what types of technologies could actually help them be more successful when they go to an independent setting. How does the person make appointments with doctors? Who assists them with that? How do they have access to transportation? What do they do in their free time? What do they want to be doing during the daytime to have that meaningful kind of day life type environment? And then also to meet with treatment team members in order to start gathering, reviewing, and discussing information. Again, assistance with finding that apartment or signing a lease, like what support would a person need for that, determining how the person's going to access transportation, looking at if they're going to be moving from a family home or from a different setting, how are they going to get household furniture and supplies, what are they going to need. So really that service is really just to kind of make sure that all of these types of things are thought of before the person moves into their own supported living home or into their own home, so that there aren't as many big surprises. It also could be really good too, because then it gives a person an idea of what they're going to have to be doing. So oftentimes we all want to live independently, but if we know that then we're going to have all this upkeep at a certain house or a certain apartment, that might not be the best one, right? You might want to try to find somewhere else that maybe has less grass or something like that. So really trying to figure out what the person needs, what the person will needs help with to become more independent, what their level of comfort is with doing certain things, that kind of stuff. Also within this definition is really looking at developing safety plans, setting up services, so phone, water, electric, that kind of stuff, practicing skills needed to be safe, assistance with interviewing roommates or developing some parameters of how that's going to happen, and then developing emergency plans in case there's a natural disaster. And we just saw a natural disaster that probably impacted a number of you on the phone in the eastern part of the state. So those are the big kind of policy changes that we're wanting to make with supported living. Again, we're waiting for some of our partners that we are we need to get their feedback in order to send to CMS per our federal rules, and this is what we're trying to kind of impact with supported living. So that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. Now, we've received a couple questions during the registration, and I also currently have 6 questions that have been asked via the webinar system. So once again, for everybody on the webinar, there is a question box on the right-hand side of your screen. So feel free to ask questions in that box, and we will try to get through as many of them as possible during the remainder of this webinar. So
and I just saw that there were a number of questions about slides. I do have some slides that provide this information, so I can send those to Kelly to send to the group.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kenneth. So the first question that we received was, has the state changed the requirement that, has the state changed, or are they thinking about changing the requirement that staff must stay awake even if the client is asleep?
Right, so that's going back to that changing of the levels. So right now, level 3 talks about the staff has to be there and awake. What we're doing is we're changing that from it's not a must, it could be, or typically this happens, but they could use appropriate technology or look at other assessments, so you wouldn't have to have someone awake overnight if that's not what you needed. Or if you're using some other means to make sure that you're supervised in a different manner. And again, one of the reasons that these levels were so kind of prescriptive is because we didn't have a lot of information about how this service was going to work, right? So now that we've gotten a lot more stories, a lot more data, we know that it makes sense to allow these levels to be more flexible.
So Kenneth, possibly using technology and technological monitoring, there can be some more flexibility?
Correct. Or if you had, so, you know, you could be, because right now the levels for the most part are based on the SIS assessment and how that works with the individual budget guideline. The person could always ask for a higher level, but someone could potentially have level 3 needs, right? But not need someone awake overnight. It could be a medical issue. They could have just some general more intensive support needs, but technology could assist them, or they don't really need someone awake, right? So by allowing that being based on assessment or based on the team's wishes or based on technology, that should make those levels more flexible.
Okay, fantastic. The next question is, how does supported living work for those who would need total assistance? Does the provider help the person pay their bills, etc.?
This is Jesse. On that one, we have a couple folks that have pretty drastic physical assistance needs that are being supported by some of the providers in the initiative, and it's really coordinated around the planning for that individual. In some cases, they have easy access, or a staff can respond within about 30 minutes if an issue happens based on their technology. And they also, the people that we're serving that have significant physical disabilities, they have roommates currently. On the question about does the provider help the person pay their bills, etc., the funding can't go towards the bills, but the workers can support the person in paying the bills, going through the process of paying the bills. But the supported living funding cannot help the person pay the bills, and the provider cannot give an incentive to help the person pay the bills unless something that I have has changed that I'm not aware of. Kenneth, do you have anything to add to that?
I'm not sure if I understand the question completely, but so could they help the person pay their bills? They could. That could be part of their plan. You know, to pay their cable bill, the staff could assist the person with doing that, right? I think that's what's being asked. The other question is, would the provider pay for some of the bills? Theoretically, if someone had a live-in caregiver, some of those types of things could be shared, but that would be very individually specific. Jesse, is that your interpretation of what the question was?
Yes, that's what it is. I just want to be clear that the provider can't really pay the bills. If that,
Right,
you know, the funding can't go towards the bills.
Okay. So, but the providers could help with the actual process of paying the bills. So you're saying there's actually no funds that the providers can provide to help them to pay the bills. Like they might be able to help them fill out their payment stub, et cetera, but they're not actually going to be providing any funding to pay the bills.
Correct.
Okay. The next question, is self-direction included in the updated waiver or in future waiver updates, and when will the updated waiver be announced?
So yes, we're going to ask for supported living to be to have the self-direction option. Like I said before, we're still waiting for some feedback from some of our partners that, based on federal legislation, we have to work with in order to move forward to get their feedback. We have some federally recognized tribes in the state, and they're still providing some feedback as the waiver kind of impacts them. Once we have that information back, we hope to get the waiver posted soon. A joint communication bulletin, I think, is going to come out pretty soon, and it looks like the date that we'll be able to get renewal, because again, we were trying to match the C waiver with the B waiver as well, per CMS's ask. So it looks like it'll probably be a January 1st start date.
Great. The next question revolves around direct support professionals. When will there be additional supported living providers and professional direct support personnel, DSPs?
I guess I can take a stab at this. So the LME MCOs all kind of manage their provider networks. So when will there be more supported living providers? I think that would probably be a better question that we can bring back to the LME MCOs if there's a specific kind of ask. Regarding direct support professionals, right now we have a work group with the LME MCOs and the state looking at core competencies and how we can get people to be have more competencies, how that training is going to look, that kind of thing. So more information will be coming out about that. In terms of a direct support professional, I think that's a very specific credential, right? So that's something that a provider may kind of take on. But more information will be coming on about how we're trying to facilitate more staff training and more competencies, and not just on the innovation side, but how that's going to bleed over to some of our other Medicaid supports as well.
Jesse, do you want to talk to me about your efforts at VIA around direct support professionals?
Sure, I can share that piece. We actually, at VIA, contracted with the National Alliance Direct Support Professionals for them to offer the informed decision-making curriculum that John Raphael will be talking about in the next webinar. And this curriculum is offered to all the providers that signed up to participate in the trainings that we did last year. These were associated with some community reinvestment dollars that VIA had through managed care. And we had 41 providers sign up for these trainings, and they have all of them received the curriculum and the training, and they have access to the NADSP website through September 19th or September 30th of 2019. What they have access to there is the learning annex that's available through the NADSP. They can access the curriculum and training ideas for their staff, and their staff will soon be working towards accessing different badges for competency areas that they have acquired. And the competency areas have to be verified in a process that the NADSP has created. This is something we'll definitely be sharing more about as we get further into the process and the badge system that the National Alliance Direct Support Professionals is using. The credentials that the Direct Support Professional sets up with the NADSP are all going, or they follow the person. So any of these providers that are currently using this curriculum, when people have been registered with one provider, the things that they have done with regard to the NADSP and training can be seen by other providers that are signed up with the NADSP. We also, in partnership, offered some classes through the College of Direct Support for the whole package to some providers. We did that in partnership a couple years ago with Trillium and Cardinal. We've had mixed success with that because all of the training is tied to online opportunities for direct support professionals. And some of the challenges that we're encountering are keeping direct support professionals in the field because we're in a very strong economy, and it's hard for our providers to match pay rates that people are getting for other jobs. So there's a number of barriers and challenges with regard to direct support professionals and creating really type of a credential that follows an individual just because of the funding structures. And we don't really have the answers. We know that those are some barriers, but we're exploring different ways to do things and always open to ideas from folks regarding how we could address the challenges for finding and keeping direct support professionals. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have a bunch of questions that have been asked through the webinar question box. So we're going to start with Betsy McMichael with First and Families, and she asked, who is the resource manual for that you mentioned earlier, Jesse?
The manual is really going to target families, and it's really kind of everybody. We're breaking it into 4 different categories, and each category has a number of informational articles that serve them, but anyone could access all of it, but parts of it will be targeted to individuals, parts to for everyone, parts to family members, parts to providers.
Wonderful. Okay. The next question.
And I think, and if I can say something again too, is that that's something that really came out of those meetings we had. The second, part or the beginning part of this year and last year as well, of having some type of resources that people have found as they've kind of begun living by themselves, things that none of us may have thought of before or may have taken for granted as people who aren't accessing services, to really have all of that in one place. And then it could be a living document as well, Jesse, right? So that as more things come up, they'll be in that guide. And I think it'll be really helpful as well for people who are thinking about transitioning to supported living. So using that supported living transition service to really look at some of those things that are in the resource guide, because it might actually spark some conversation. Like, we didn't think about this, or we might be taking that for granted, things like that.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I pulled up the buckets that we've created thus far. And our plan is to get feedback on all this from the group that we meet with in November. But we're laying it out with a foundational principles and information for everybody, for people and their families, for the staff who support people, and then for organizations, and then just a bucket for resources to other links. So and then there would be a link to the full compiled handbook too. That's just a basic web page sketch, but we want to make it as user-friendly and easy to access as possible.
Great, thank you so much. The next question is from Dottie Foley, and she asks, please address funding and the cap of $135,000 and how it is not sufficient for people using level 3 services that live alone.
So I can briefly take a stab at that as well. So right now the 135 is based on our cost neutrality for the waiver. At this moment, that's not going to change. I think that one thing is that if we're not overserving some people in some other areas, so if we're forcing someone to have overnight staffing, that's going to be potentially a higher rate that's going to not maybe trickle down to some of the other activities that the person wants. That can potentially have more of an access of more funds. Something else that we are looking at the state as well is how we kind of re-envision that 135. So that's based on the average ICF kind of costs. Some discussion's been around, well, maybe if we think about our population a little bit different way. Innovations is very diverse, right? It has some people who don't need much support at all and are fairly independent. And then on the other end, it has some people who have various medical support needs. They may be medically fragile in a way, or have a lot of medical support needs. We have some people who have more significant behavioral support needs, and we have some people who, to live their independent life, just need more support that may be not connected to either medical or behavioral. So maybe what we're thinking about is kind of looking at those populations in a little bit of a different way, and then potentially for a smaller group of people, could that 135 be higher? We haven't gotten very far in those discussions yet, but we are having those discussions.
Great. Thank you, Kenneth. The next question is from Harold Barlow, and she said, staffing of DSPs is a big challenge for providers. Supported living clients often go without shifts being covered. How will this be remedied?
So I think for this one, I don't know if we can answer this question. Maybe we can reach out later to Carol Barlow about what's happening. We do get backup staffing reports. Supported living is on there. We have not seen very many shifts not being covered that way. We have seen a few where we've asked for more information where the individual has actually declined having a different type of staff person come in, and maybe their family's covering it, or there's some other reason why not. So I think we'll need a little bit more specifics of what's happening. Jesse, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I didn't clearly hear the question because it broke up on my end.
Okay, well, what I'll do is I'll reach out to Carol afterwards, and we can see if we can get some direct information about the situation she's talking about. It was about backup staffing and making sure that all shifts are covered. Okay, the next question is from Michelle, and she asks, I have heard that there will be hourly supported living in the waiver update. Is that true?
That is true. Let me try to pull up. So what we discussed too is having a periodic kind of modifier for supported living. And I don't know if I can give total specifics, but I think it's for people who use 4 hours or less of supported living per day. And again, because those people may not need or may not want to use the full daily rate, they might just be using a little bit of service per day and maybe using more day supports, more supported living, or not supported living, supported employment, then paying that at the periodic modifier rate. But I believe it's going to be 4 or less hours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kenneth. The next question that we have is from and he says, hello, what technology is available for supported living? Is there a list of what technology provides what types of support?
This is Jesse. Some of the first things that need to occur with regard to technology is an assessment by either the North Carolina Assistive Technology Program or vendors throughout the state that specialize in assistive technology. We work a lot in Asheville with Simply Home. I know they're statewide, and there's other providers that are statewide. Most of those providers, you can access a preliminary screening on their websites, so you can get an idea of what technology they may have to support an individual. There are apps that track staff, ways to communicate with staff directly, that or apps that notify if the person's not in the room they should be at the time they should be, things that tell people if a stove has been left on so that staff can respond, verbal prompting apps that can be installed in the home to remind people to take their medication in addition to pill boxes. There's a plethora of different things available to support individuals, and the best way to start is with an assistive technology expert, either through the North Carolina ATP or Assistive Technology Program or a vendor of those services. And then most of those items can be purchased through the Innovations waiver, and they're really not that expensive once you start getting into the weeds of it, especially the monitoring devices. The challenges are usually the continuing connectivity pieces. Those usually run anywhere from $40 to $80 a month, and that has to be taken into consideration if it's something that operates off the internet. And we've run into challenges in rural places where the internet's not really native. So we've had to explore different options as to how supports can be used. But I would recommend starting with an assistive technology vendor or the North Carolina Assistive Technology Program. Would you like to add anything, Kenneth?
No, I think that's it. I mean, I think that too about having that resource guide is having some of those links to different technology providers or different technology people who are, in the independent living type arena, so that people know where to go to get that information.
Great. Thank you guys so much. All right. The next question is from John, and they ask, have there been any changes to person living with other family members? I know someone that wants to live with his sister, but he has been told that he cannot. His sister is not going to provide services. She would just like to be his roommate.
Right. So going back, right. So that's something that we're changing as well, or proposing to change. So the person would be receiving another type of service, though. I believe that's how we have it now. So if the sister was potentially accessing state-funded IDD services or a mental health service or something like that, that would be when they would be able to live together using supported living.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Right.
This is another question that comes up, but I think it's always a good one to go over for anyone who might be new to the initiative. The question is from Mary, and she asks, can family members work for the providers and cover shifts?
Not at this time, no.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Betsy McMichael, and she says, can you share what portion of people are at the different levels within supported living currently statewide?
I cannot tell you that off of the top of my head, but when we have our next call, we can bring that information.
Great. I will make a note that we will find that out and let everybody know.
And just to give everyone a little bit of feedback, what we do is we kind of ask the LME MCOs for that information, and then we also look in NC Tracks, which is kind of our information system, and then we can pull out and see if there are any discrepancies.
Great. Thank you so much, Kenneth. Okay, the next question involves an acronym that I'm not familiar with, but maybe Kenneth or Jesse, one of you are. Do the changes in supportive living allow for RADS, R-A-D-S-E? And that's from Wyatt.
That's the relativist direct support provider, and they do not.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Just going through these questions and seeing which ones we have not covered. We have some questions that are of a more personal nature, and I'm going to take note of those questions and bring them to Jesse and Kenneth offline, and they can reach out individually with you. Here's a great question. Can you please address how families and individuals look for roommates? Right now, there doesn't seem to be a mechanism for families to find other families in regards to roommates. And that's from Dottie. How currently are people finding roommates if they are finding roommates?
Word of mouth and seeking on their own. This is Jesse. We run into barriers with regard to confidentiality. I think it would be wonderful to explore the possibility of creating some type of bulletin board, electronic bulletin board possibly, that could be used for this. The challenge that we've encountered in our area is that we can't do the bulletin board because of confidentiality pieces. At least that's the guidance that we've received. So really we're connecting people. Often it's the provider agency that's connecting people, where they have people that know one another or individuals that have lived with people in the past and they ask where that person's at. But they're all typically served by the same provider agency in the move to that. We are going to be exploring different ways to help some folks move out of institutional settings with roommate settings or roommate setups, but that's going to require coordination with the individuals and the guardians. It's one of those things that we're very open to suggestions about how you could go about it. I know there's some different advocacy groups that could possibly host a bulletin board, and then we could just share that information with folks so that they could go there. That might be one way around this challenge. But as the state and then managed care organizations in the state, we're not going to be able to host any type of bulletin board like that. And really our providers can't either because of the confidentiality rules, at least based on the interpretation of the confidentiality rules I have been given. Is there anything you could add to that, Kenneth?
The only thing I can add to that is that's something that we need to continually look at. I know that some other states have some other mechanisms that they use for roommates, so I think we just need to continually investigate those.
Great. And we had Betsy McMichael who just made a comment saying that First and Families would be willing to host a housemate share bulletin board with some guidance and planning. So that might be a great community organization that we can work with in the future. So thank you, Betsy.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Betsy.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, so we have time for one more question. And it's going to come from Caitlin Stills. And what has been the greatest challenge that providers have faced providing the services, and how have they overcome them?
Well, this is Jesse. I think the greatest challenge is ensuring staffing as needed for the individual because of the challenges with just keeping support staff in general. I know that some of the agencies that we've been working with, often they are sending QPs to support folks if they have issues with direct support professionals, either deciding they want a different job or not showing up or needing additional support. So to me, I think staffing the individual according to the staffing plan that's developed by the team has been the greatest challenge for many of our providers. And then, of course, I would also put housing very high up there. And that's specifically in our region, housing has been a real challenge because of the length of wait lists for some of these subsidized housing units that are available in Buncombe and surrounding counties. Those are the two that come to my mind first. Are there any that you would add, Kenneth?
I think what we've heard is staffing, housing. We've heard from a number of individuals who felt like a lot of times the agency, when they were beginning the service, was treating it more like a group home and not like the person's own home. So it was causing some conflict with the person trying to become more independent. I think one of the challenges too is that, it's that whole concept of allowing people to take risks and allowing someone to do typical things that a person would do in their own home. But how do we do that as we're also providing service to them and potentially providing quite a bit of services per day? So just trying to wrap our heads around that this is the person's home and that we kind of have to conform to the rules of the person and not put other types of rules either coming from the provider agency, coming from the MCO, coming from the state, coming from higher up, having those types of bureaucratic things get piled on the person so that they don't feel like it's their own home. I think that's been a challenge for sure. And then kind of just assessing what supported living looks like and how the person's actually doing. Is the person feeling and becoming more independent? So I think those are the major challenges for sure.
Great. And Caitlin, another resource you can have is this initiative has done spotlight webinars with the different providers. And those are recorded. Those webinars have been recorded and they're on the DD Council's website. So if you go to nccdd.org, you'll be able to find links to all the recordings of the webinars where we talk to providers who are providing the service about their challenges and how they have creatively overcome them. So, great. Well, thank you everyone for attending this webinar. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to be part of this conversation about supported living. Once again, please take a minute to complete the survey that will be sent out via email today. It's a very short survey and it helps us make sure that we're giving you the information you need. A copy of this archived webinar and PowerPoint presentation will be available at the DD Council's website most likely next week, and the link is right there. So thank you all. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Kenneth, for participating, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.